Have you ever felt like you're constantly fighting to prove your intelligence, skills, or even your worth in a competitive world? What if, instead of striving to stand out, you chose the opposite, to play the fool? Today, we're diving into this intriguing idea through the lens of Arthur Schopenhauer, one of philosophy's most provocative thinkers. He believed that embracing the role of the fool could be a powerful strategy for navigating the complexities of social life. Sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But stick around, and you'll see how this perspective might transform the way you interact with the world. What does it mean to be a fool in society? Before we delve into Schopenhauer's take, let's clarify what we mean by the term fool. This isn't the fool in the vulgar sense, someone ignorant, irrational, or lacking sense. On the contrary, the fool we're referring to is someone who deliberately steps away from society's shallow expectations. This fool chooses a path that might be misunderstood or underestimated, but actually reflects a deep understanding of human dynamics. They challenge dominant values and detach themselves from the endless chase for power, prestige, or status. For Schopenhauer, this idea ties directly to his critique of the will. According to the German philosopher, the essence of reality is the will, a blind, irrational, and relentless force driving all beings. This will manifests in individuals as an insatiable desire for existence, survival, and satisfaction. Society then becomes the stage where the will plays out most visibly. The constant fight for recognition, the struggle for superiority, and the pursuit of fleeting pleasures. By refusing to play this game, the fool emerges as someone who breaks free from this cycle, choosing a path aligned with the wisdom of understanding the illusory and destructive nature of the will. Schopenhauer and the social role of the fool. In his monumental work, The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer argues that the phenomenal world, as we perceive it, is merely a manifestation of the will. In this framework, human beings are inevitably trapped in a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. The pursuit of material goods, social status, or romantic conquests, for example, is rooted in this will. However, these pursuits rarely bring lasting happiness, as one desire is quickly replaced by another, perpetuating a state of restlessness and suffering. Within this context, Schopenhauer's fool is neither naive nor disconnected, but someone who transcends this dynamic. The fool recognizes the futility of chasing society's imposed goals and chooses instead to step away from them. While this figure may be misunderstood or underestimated by others for not engaging in the games of power and vanity that define social life, it is precisely this refusal that makes the fool free and, paradoxically, wise. The fool becomes a silent resistance to the forces that perpetuate human suffering, the fool as an anti-heroic figure. Schopenhauer was deeply skeptical of society and its structures, often describing it as a stage where vanity and selfishness reign supreme. For him, individuals engage in competitions that are not only unnecessary, but also self-destructive. In this context, the fool emerges as an anti-heroic figure, someone who does not seek the spotlight or crave admiration. Paradoxically, it is their refusal to participate in this social theater that makes them extraordinary. The fool chooses to live by internal principles rather than succumb to external pressures. Schopenhauer acknowledges that adopting the role of the fool is no easy task. It often means facing disdain or misunderstanding from others. After all, society tends to celebrate those who exhibit material success, charisma, and influence. By rejecting these measures of value, the fool challenges established norms and can be perceived as a threat to the status quo. However, this renunciation is also a form of emancipation, liberating the individual from the illusions and suffering that accompany the relentless quest for recognition. The critique of the will as the foundation for the fool. For Schopenhauer, the foundation of the fool's philosophy lies in his critique of the will. The fool is not someone who simply doesn't know or cannot engage in social life. On the contrary, the fool is someone who has deeply understood the deceptive and insatiable nature of human desires and has consciously chosen to renounce them. In this sense, the fool embodies practical wisdom, someone who lives in a way that minimizes suffering and avoids the trap of endless desires. To fully grasp the role of the fool in Schopenhauer's thought, it is crucial to explore the concept of resignation, a cornerstone of his philosophy. Resignation, for the German philosopher, means recognizing the illusory nature of the will and consequently renouncing its demands. This posture transcends the ceaseless pursuit of pleasures, possessions, and achievements, leading the individual to a state of contemplation and inner serenity. The fool as a social ascetic. Schopenhauer often refers to asceticism as a path to liberation from suffering. While the traditional ascetic withdraws from the world through religious or spiritual practices, the fool, as conceived here, adopts a form of social asceticism. Rather than retreating to a monastery or cave, the fool remains within society but rejects its rules and priorities. Instead of seeking approval or competing for status, the fool embraces their marginal position and turns it into a fortress against the world's ills. This stance should not be mistaken for apathy or conformity. The fool is not someone who passively surrenders to fate. Rather, they actively choose not to be governed by the impulses of the will. In their actions, the fool reflects a wisdom unconcerned with others' judgment or societal standards, guided instead by internal principles and a broader perspective on existence. Suffering and liberation through understanding. In Schopenhauer's view, suffering is intrinsic to the human condition because it arises from the very nature of the will. The will drives us to desire constantly, creating a perpetual tension between what we have and what we want. However, Schopenhauer argues that understanding the illusory nature of these desires can free us. The fool, in this sense, is someone who has reached this understanding and therefore refuses to be dominated by suffering. They recognize that social success, fame, and wealth are traps that sustain the cycle of desire and frustration. Importantly, the fool demonstrates that this liberation does not require a complete withdrawal from the world. They do not abandon their daily life, but instead find ways to live in defiance of dominant values. This subversive attitude allows the fool to maintain their integrity and authenticity even in a hostile environment. The wisdom of the fool, simplicity and authenticity. Schopenhauer extols simplicity as a form of resistance to the will. By choosing a simple life, the fool avoids the excesses that fuel incessant desires and the subsequent suffering. They embrace authenticity, refusing to wear social masks or participate in the theater of vanity. This may make them a target of mockery or disdain, but to the fool, such reactions are inconsequential. Their inner security is far stronger than any external judgment. Here, the Schopenhauerian fool can be likened to literary and philosophical figures who embody wisdom disguised as naivety. From the fools in Shakespeare's plays to the cynics of ancient Greek philosophy, there is a long tradition of characters who, through their apparent foolishness, reveal profound truths about the human condition. Schopenhauer invites us to view these figures not with condescension, but with admiration, recognizing in them a wisdom that transcends appearances. The fool and active nihilism. One common critique of Schopenhauer's pessimism is that it can lead to nihilism, a worldview where nothing holds value or purpose. However, the role of the fool demonstrates that Schopenhauer's philosophy need not be paralyzing. The fool embodies a form of active nihilism, They acknowledge the lack of inherent meaning in humanity's pursuit of status and power, but, rather than succumbing to despair, choose to live meaningfully within that understanding. The fool finds joy and purpose in contemplation, creativity, and authentic relationships, even in a world dominated by the will. Why play the role of the fool in society? Playing the role of the fool in society is not merely a philosophical choice. It is also a practical strategy for navigating the tensions and contradictions of modern life. The fool experiences less anxiety because they are not constantly trying to prove something to others. They encounter less frustration because they are not driven by impossible to satisfy desires. Most importantly, they preserve their inner freedom, which, according to Schopenhauer, is the only true form of freedom. The natural question that follows is, how can we incorporate this approach into our own lives? The answer lies in rethinking our relationship with work, relationships, and societal expectations. Playing the role of the fool does not mean shirking responsibilities or completely withdrawing, but rather adopting a critical and deliberate perspective on what truly matters. The role of the fool at work. In the workplace, the fool's approach can be particularly liberating. We live in an age where work is often glorified as a measure of personal worth, and productivity is treated as a virtue. This fosters a culture of relentless competition, where success is defined by promotions, salaries, and titles. The fool, however, rejects this logic. They work to live, not live to work. Adopting this perspective means avoiding pitfalls like excessive overtime or the constant pursuit of external validation in the professional sphere. The fool understands that work should be a part of life, not its entirety. They strive for balance, allocating time for contemplation, leisure, and human connections without being consumed by the obsession with results. This approach does not imply negligence or apathy toward responsibilities. The fool fulfills their duties, but refuses to become enslaved by them. They maintain a healthy distance from societal pressures, recognizing that their dignity and worth are not defined by their job title or salary. The role of the fool in relationships. In relationships, the fool's role is equally transformative. Schopenhauer was deeply skeptical of human nature, particularly regarding the selfish motivations that often underlie our interactions. The fool, by contrast, seeks authenticity in relationships, rejecting power dynamics and emotional manipulation. Adopting this stance means fostering connections rooted in honesty and mutual respect, rather than relying on appearances or ulterior motives. The fool is unconcerned with impressing or pleasing everyone. They value a small number of deep, meaningful relationships that contribute to their well-being and personal growth. This approach can lead to conflict, as the fool often challenges societal expectations about how relationships should function. For instance, they may be perceived as insensitive or indifferent for refusing to engage in social conventions they deem superficial. Yet this same authenticity is what makes their connections more profound and enduring: the fool and social expectations. One of the greatest pressures we face is the need to meet societal expectations, whether in appearance, lifestyle, or achievements. Schopenhauer's fool rejects this pressure, choosing instead to live according to their own values and interests, even if it makes them a target of criticism or misunderstanding. This rejection of societal norms is not an act of empty rebellion, but a deliberate choice rooted in a deep understanding of the illusory nature of these expectations. For the fool, sacrificing inner peace or authenticity to please others or conform to arbitrary standards is pointless. Instead, they choose a path that allows them to live simply and meaningfully. For example, in a society obsessed with status and consumption, the fool might opt for a minimalist lifestyle, focusing on experiences rather than possessions. They might avoid social media or disengage from trivial discussions that merely fuel the ego. These choices, while unconventional, allow the fool to preserve their freedom and avoid the suffering that comes with the relentless pursuit of approval. The challenges of adopting the role of the fool. Playing the role of the fool in modern society is not without its challenges. Those who choose this path often face misunderstanding, isolation, and even hostility. Society values conformity and tends to marginalize those who refuse to follow its rules. Yet it is precisely this marginalization that underscores the subversive power of the fool. To overcome these challenges, it is essential to cultivate a strong sense of inner confidence and an unwavering commitment to one's values. The fool must be resilient, able to withstand external pressures and find contentment in their own company. This requires courage and determination, but also yields significant rewards, such as greater peace of mind and freedom. The rewards of playing the role of the fool. Despite the difficulties, the role of the fool offers numerous rewards. It allows individuals to escape the cycle of desire and frustration described by Schopenhauer, replacing it with a life of simplicity and authenticity. The fool is not ruled by fear of failure or the need to please others, and as a result, experiences a sense of freedom that is rare in modern society. Moreover, the fool serves as a living reminder that alternative ways of life are possible. They inspire those around them to question their own priorities and reflect on whether they are truly living according to their values or merely following the tide. The fool as cultural resistance. Culture often acts as a mold, defining expectations, behaviors, and priorities that individuals must adhere to in order to be deemed successful or respectable. Within this context, the fool functions as an agent of resistance. They reject materialism, superficiality, and the insatiable pursuit of status, opting instead for a more authentic and reflective path. This cultural resistance finds echoes in historical figures such as Diogenes the Cynic, who lived an extraordinarily simple life while defying the conventions of his time. Diogenes embodied a critique of societies that prioritized material wealth and rigid social norms, acting as a clear precursor to Schopenhauer's concept of the fool. Not only did he ridicule prevailing values, but he also demonstrated that a simpler, more independent life was not only possible, but desirable. Similarly, the modern fool resists rampant consumerism and the dependence on social media, which often promotes a shallow view of success and happiness. By living more intentionally and prioritizing meaningful experiences over hollow achievements, the fool challenges these norms and offers an alternative vision of what it means to live well. The fool as spiritual resistance. From a spiritual perspective, the fool represents a rejection of the ego and the illusions created by the will. Schopenhauer often referenced asceticism as a means of transcendence, and the fool embodies this idea by distancing themselves from the traps of desire and competition. They pursue a more contemplative life, seeking meaning beyond fleeting gratifications. This approach aligns with spiritual traditions like Buddhism, which also emphasizes renunciation of desire as a path to liberation. The fool can be likened to the wise Buddhist who recognizes the impermanence of all things, and rather than resisting this reality, accepts it with serenity. This acceptance is itself an act of resistance against the will and against a society that constantly demands more from the individual. Literary and historical examples of the fool. Beyond Diogenes, numerous historical and literary figures embody the role of the fool as an agent of transformation. In literature, the court jester in Shakespeare's plays, such as the fool in King Lear, often serves as a revealer of uncomfortable truths. Though underestimated or ignored by other characters, the fool is frequently the only one who perceives reality as it truly is. This paradoxical figure, seemingly simple yet profoundly wise, mirrors Schopenhauer's ideal of the fool. Another example is the anti-hero in modern narratives, who frequently challenges societal norms and defies expectations. These characters, by refusing to play by society's rules, expose the hypocrisy and flaws of existing structures. They remind us that the role of the fool is not passive, but actively transformative. The transformative impact of the fool. Playing the role of the fool does more than challenge norms. It inspires others to question their own lives. This stance creates a ripple effect, encouraging those around the fool to reflect on the societal pressures they accept without question. Through their courage and authenticity, the fool demonstrates that there are viable alternatives to the conventional pursuit of status and validation. The fool's influence is often quiet yet profound. They plant seeds of change in others, not through grand speeches, but by the practical example of their own life. In a world increasingly dominated by superficiality and distractions, the fool becomes an indispensable figure, a reminder that there is beauty and value in simplicity and authenticity. Why should you embrace the role of the fool in society? Schopenhauer's philosophy invites us to rethink our priorities and consider that the values society promotes are often illusory and counterproductive. Playing the role of the fool, far from being a sign of weakness or ignorance, is an act of practical wisdom. It's a deliberate choice to live a more authentic life, free from the chains of the will and societal expectations. Adopting this perspective takes courage. It means going against the tide and facing misunderstanding. Yet, the rewards are profound: greater freedom, inner peace, and a deeper connection with yourself and the world. The fool is not merely a passive observer of society, but an agent of change, a quiet light guiding an alternative path for those brave enough to follow. So as you reflect on Schopenhauer's words, ask yourself, are you willing to be seen as a fool to live a more authentic and free life? The answer might just define the course of your existence. If this idea of embracing the role of the fool resonated with you, I invite you to dive even deeper. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join this community of curious minds, questioning, learning, and seeing the world differently. Leave a like. It helps me bring more content like this, and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and would love to know your opinion. And don't stop here. Check out the videos popping up on your screen right now. They'll further expand your perspective on profound and thought-provoking topics. See you there.